Two powerhouse organizations are working hand in hand to address education gaps in the Philippines. The United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, and UNICEF Philippines inked a deal seeking to improve the learning of children. And joining us now via Zoom are UNICEF Philippines Deputy Representative Behzad Noubary and USAID Director of Education Office in the Philippines, Thomas Leblanc. Good morning, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's great to be here.
Now, gentlemen, this is great and admirable work that you guys do. How did this partnership come about? And despite the many things that we can sort of put our attention towards, we're focusing on education as the center of this partnership. Why is that?
Well, we both work in education. We're both development agencies that think that education is critical to the development of any country. And here in the Philippines in particular, we found that we can collaborate in helping to improve literacy, numeracy, as well as help out-of-school youth go back to school through the alternative learning system. So both of us work very closely with the Department of Education to try to improve the education system.
Right. Behzad, children are back to face-to-face learning. It's taken us, I think, much longer than everybody else to return to that. Can you give us an idea of how you see the pandemic affecting children's education? How big an impact was that?
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, we've had one of the longest school shutdowns in the world, in the Philippines, unfortunately. But the great news is that that's behind us. We are, as of November 2nd, as you know, we've had now the majority of public schools, 97.5 is what we understand, have reopened for full in-person learning. And that's really the first great step in our recovery. What we know from evidence from around the world is that remote learning has not been nearly as effective as in-person learning. So reopening schools was quite important. One of the ways in which we assess where we're at in the Philippines is through what we call the RAPID framework. Partners like UNICEF, USAID, UNESCO, World Bank use this. And I think if we look at how the Philippines is doing vis-a-vis the RAPID framework, we can have a sense. I think the R in RAPID is for reopening and reaching children. So there, I think we're off to a great start. The A in RAPID is on assessing learning loss, and I think that's a step that we're at now. UNICEF is supporting DepEd in trying to assess what the learning loss has been. All the regions have learning plans in place, which is great. Moving on, I think the P is to prioritize the fundamental. I think the pandemic has taught us that we need to go back to the basics. And here I'm talking about reading, writing, arithmetic, and really not focusing on learning to read, but reading to learn, reading and the basics as a foundation for lifelong learning. And here, I think the moves by the Department of Education to develop a national curriculum on reading, on math, and on tutoring are quite welcome, as well as carving out very important and precious minutes in the day to focus on the fundamentals.
Right. Thomas, also, pre-pandemic, if I can jump in, pre-pandemic, the Philippines, I think here, we were already lagging in this sector. And I think the pandemic obviously underlined that. But at the same time, it's allowed us to almost like put a renewed focus and almost hit the reset button, so to speak. Where do you think we are in the Philippines in terms of bridging gaps and inequalities in the education sector?
Well, I think that the pandemic actually gave the Philippines an opportunity to move forward. A big gap has been in the area of online learning. And with the pandemic, the Department of Education realized how important it is to embrace online learning. And so I think that they've made a lot of strides in terms of figuring out how we can do things online. I mean, we're a far way from doing that, but now it's become really important. It's become a real big focus for the Department of Education. And so I think that although the pandemic impacted the entire world. There's learning loss across the globe. the United States, we've experienced tremendous learning loss over 2 years. But I think that what you have going on now is the realization that we are in an education crisis here in the Philippines and around the world, and that we have to address this. And I think the Department of Education is doing that, and we're supporting them to do that by starting the National Reading Program, the National Maths Program. So these are the fundamental skills that all children need in order to move forward. And we also, I think, are having a great impact on out-of-school youth. We're helping them to either go back to school or find employment. We're working very closely with the Department of Education, TESDA, even universities to figure out how do we address these systemic issues of improving education across the board. And so I'm very optimistic. I think that the Philippines is going to make great progress in the coming years under the new administration.
Right. If I can ask Behzad, this partnership obviously is like a double whammy, so to speak. We have the forces of USAID and UNICEF coming together. What is the specifics of the partnership, and how will that be, a renewed benefit to this sector?
Thank you, Paulo. Indeed, as you know, we as the international development partners, we're here to support the Philippines and support here at the Department of Education to ensure that every child is able to realize their right to learning. And what we're trying to do through this formal agreement is to ensure that our support to the Department of Education is complementary. One practical example of that, for example, USAID is focusing on their IBC Plus program, where focuses on reading fundamentals of elementary school. And we complement that at UNICEF by focusing on early learning, on their early childhood development centers, ensuring that any disabilities are detected early, because we know that, for example, if children are that participate in preschool have a higher chance of succeeding in elementary school. So this is just one example of how we attempt to be complementary. We also try through this MOU to ensure that when USAID, for example, is focusing on certain parts of the country, certain regions, we complement in other regions. So it's really a way to ensure that we take advantage of synergies and support the government of the Philippines and the Filipino children in the best way possible.
Sounds fantastic. UNICEF, USAID, it's a 1-2 punch that will KO learning loss for sure. Thank you so much for your time, gentlemen. That was Behzad and Thomas. Thank you for joining us here on New Day.